From the post-millennial chaos at MSNBC as Rachel Maddow furious at Morning Joe hosts for meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, according to a report. Rachel Maddow is pissed at them, and as are other presenters like Chris Hayes and Ari Melber. Not only that, but MSNBC is, once again, suffering its worst ever ratings, hitting a key demographic viewership of 38,000.
Oh.
So it's funny because Rachel Maddow is getting paid $25 million to talk to nobody. So I don't know what's going on with MSNBC, why it matters. But I will say for us, what matters is this is the downward spiral. You got Keith Olbermann came out and said Rachel Maddow sold out her principles for $25 million. That's wild to me. And now she's going after Morning Joe because they're trying, in fear, I might add, but to try and apologize, I guess, to Trump for having been so just nasty and being liars. But this is it. We're watching the internal combustion, I suppose, of these lunatics who were willing to say anything for cash.
I think they're doing a little good cop, bad cop action. Joe and Meek are desperate for access to Donald Trump. So I think that's why they went to go kiss their rings, because they want some late night phone calls from Donald Trump like Maggie Haberman gets from the New York Times. They want Maggie Haberman treatment.
Yeah. Do you know who held Matt Gaetz's congressional seat in Florida's 1st congressional district in the early 2000s?
Joe
Scarborough.
Joe Scarborough.
That's insane. No.
Yep.
Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Joe Scarborough.
Joe Scarborough.
Isn't that something?
And
his dad was also like a career politician. I forget the entire history.
Joe donated to Gaetz at one point early on. And so the back and forth that this guy has done is just staggering.
Well, he's the one who initially brought Trump into the fold early on in the first Republican primary that Trump ran in. They used to bring him on all the time, just like the people at The View did. They helped platform Trump and make him into a candidate at the beginning and for his budding political career.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, just for Americans who aren't steeped in political culture and media sense, just so you understand, 38,000, if you had 38,000 people in a room, that's a ton of people. But like literally on this Instagram story post, I think I get 300,000 views on average. If these guys are getting 38,000 on MSNBC and they're being paid $25 million a year, it's insane. The math does not make sense.
More than that, you get those numbers in the key demographic. Most of the people watching at MSNBC are 65 plus and not advertiser friendly, not an advertiser friendly age
Absolutely.
group.
Such an enormous shift to independent media, to social media platforms, and also the plurality of these platforms allows for the competition. And I don't think we've necessarily seen this yet, and actually Tim might have a different opinion on that because I'm not in the streaming business, but if you get more and more that are competing with each other, my hope is that their standard of cracking down on certain types of speech is going to allow for more free speech, because when you allow the free market to have so many different options as opposed to one individual having a monopoly, it allows for many people to choose from those different options. I think that's what you see on X.
They tried to fight the corporate press, the media. They attacked YouTube. YouTube attacked back. And they were hoping to shut down shows like this. But it didn't matter. And I've explained this quite a bit. It is not an issue of you've got a group of Gen Z that one day saw the light and watched a YouTube video and went, oh, wow, Trump was right. It's that the younger generations are already feeling these politics or thinking these things. And as they get older and move into the political space, they already are more inclined to agree with a show like Joe Rogan's or ours or, Dan Bongino, for instance. So when they try to suppress and censor this at the corporate level, like Google or whatever companies, it works for a period, but eventually cable news loses all its money and the advertisers step in and they're like, why can't we advertise on the biggest shows? And YouTube eventually has no choice but to back off and reduce the censorship, because this is where the conversation is going to happen. They have no choice at this point but to say, this is the direction the country is going. Trump won. He won the popular vote. The Republicans won everything. And the reason they lost is because they tried so desperately to engage in this weird censorship, which created this. What ended up happening was you had the authentic world where it was regular people having real debates. And then you had the fictional Democrat cult liberal media world where it was manufactured and everybody hated it. And it blew up in their faces. We are moving now into this new era following the podcast presidency, they call it. Ad rates are already starting to go through the roof. We're hearing from there's big networks that are buyers. For a long time, they said, everybody wants TV. Then it started shifting. Well, podcasts are doing really, really well. Now it's not even podcasts. It's YouTube specifically.
Yes.
The big networks are saying, we don't really care about Apple, Spotify, and other platforms anymore. We want YouTube access because we want video components. So Spotify says, we're going to make it so you can watch videos on Spotify now. And then YouTube went, oops, because 10 years ago, YouTube had the vodcasting monopoly. And what did they do? Started banning people and shutting it down in fear and panic. Now they regret that, I bet.
Well, I imagine they do, but at the same time, when you have like Spotify trying to do what YouTube is doing. I mean, they started picking up the podcasts because YouTube was banning people and saying, hey, we don't want this on our platform, which is, I mean, obviously it was a blunder, but that's why it's good to have the ability to have markets and have other competition. Spotify started picking people up. Joe Rogan, which was he was the biggest podcast on YouTube, and then he went over to Spotify. And I understand it wasn't an exclusive deal and stuff, but at the same time,
At first it was.
Yeah. So for a little while, YouTube's like, oh, what the heck are we going to do now? And it, made Joe Rogan a lot of money. But that's why it's important to have multiple places where you can actually go for these different ideas and stuff. So the fact that the mainstream media has a unified voice, it didn't matter because you had places like YouTube and because you had places like Spotify to actually present this stuff. And there was a time where the mainstream was trying to squash this stuff. Right after January 6th, Parler got completely and totally boned because they were all their servers were on Amazon, and Amazon helped cut them out, and you had Gab has a problem with some of their user base being a little too edgy and stuff like that. But the fact that there are options, it's a big deal and it matters.
I think Ben Shapiro was talking about how they're having to really pour a lot of infrastructure into their website and trying to drive people off of some of these excess platforms like YouTube, because they feel as if there could come a point where they have put so much stock in these platforms that if they completely just yank it away, then they're left with nothing. And so they want to drive people back to their website individually. And one of the other, and I want to get Tim's opinion on that too, but the other thing too, I was reading a book about how to essentially build up your listener base as well. This author, I think his name is Graham Cochran, was suggesting that you should not focus on building up your social media, but rather your email list, because people don't change their emails, but you don't know what's going to happen to a particular platform. If Twitter gets bought out and changed, then that was great for us, but for the libs,
It was great for them too, but they were mad.
For everybody.
Yeah. So the meme about the left is, they're not mad they're being censored. They're being mad that you're no longer censored.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which is why they thought it was a bad thing. I completely agree. Yeah. But because of that purchase, a lot of people left that social media platform. So this person's arguing that you basically have to create your own little bubble of infrastructure, build up your following on the website, and people don't change their email addresses. They might go off of a platform like Parler, whether if we want it to stay around, that's great, but it might just wake up and it's not there the next day. You don't know what's going to happen to it, but it's essentially like your mailing address. You always have some form of a mailing address. You might switch your email address, but it's far less often than if you move off of a social media platform.
I do think there's something to say about originally mainstream media got a lot of their credibility from being the only ones around. They were the only news sources. Sure. They had a monopoly, and now we had different social media platforms allowing different types of accessibility. So now that's not what the mainstream media is good for. But the thing that I still think that they have that other podcasts don't is access. They have access to high-ranking political officials. They have access to different representatives. Madison, maybe you could tell us a little bit about this, but I don't know. It seems for every scoop even from Republican reps, it always goes to Politico, New York Times, Axios. It's never really going to the Daily Wire. It's never really going to Timcast. So it's still in the Republican ecosystem of elected officials. They go to MSNBC. They'll still do some Fox, and Fox will still get some breaking news. But Trump talks to Maggie Haberman from the New York Times all the time, and Axios. I read Axios' news because that's where they're getting a lot of these quotes from.
It's generational. So right now, we've had Kash Patel on this show, I think, 3 times or more? 3 times? 4 times. And he's fantastic. We're huge fans, and I consider him a friend of the show. This world is changing. The people that are entering this administration, we know many of them. And this is where that access is moving into our space, and you're going to get real, authentic conversations. Maggie Haberman and these people at the Times or whatever, they're plastic people. They're going to call
The Republicans give them access to.
Of course, and they shouldn't. But but it doesn't matter what I think they should or shouldn't do, because it will change. And in the future, it's not going to be, let's say in 15, 20 years, it's no longer going to be like the New York Times calling a person like Kash Patel and saying, we need a quote on this. It's going to be Kash Patel being like, hey, can I pop on the show and talk about a thing that's going on? And it's going to be more authentic, raw conversations where your political leaders, your law enforcement leaders are going to sit down 2 hours raw and be like, dude, I will tell you exactly what is happening, and you judge for yourself if you think I'm telling the truth. But when you put someone in that position, like Donald Trump talking for 3 hours with Rogan, you see the authentic conversation. You can see where Trump is like, maybe I don't want to answer this or whatever, and he tries, and you get it. But this is why Kamala Harris couldn't do it. It's why the shows she went on was a deeply controlled system where she said, you come to me. And then you had that moment where Hannity said that staffers were back there being like, we got to go. Like, we're out of time. That's all over. We are moving into the podcast era, authenticity.
Well, just to touch on your question earlier, but I will say one big part that is changing is guys, especially when I came into office and a lot of people started following and coming into office. I mean, we would break stories to our friends versus going to the Times or going to at Politico and things like that, because we know that that's the future and these are our friends. We want to help our friends. That's one thing that I love about the conservative movement is we have created an ecosystem where, I mean, obviously the establishment came really hard after me, but I didn't lose a single friend who's like in the conservative movement.
We also use the legacy media to our advantage too, because
Exactly.
in DC, here's another thing that people like the Times and the Washington Post are now having to deal with is that Republicans like the hit pieces that are being written against them a lot of the time. And the way that you are supposed to harness that, it is essentially earned media. If you get a hit piece written by the New York Times or somebody like that against a Republican, because everybody knows that the Times and the Post are against Republicans.
Yep.
So you are presented with a gift from the legacy media. And if you don't take that and start fundraising off of it immediately, then you have just wasted an enormous opportunity. There were headlines that Madison would get sometimes that we would get, and I would read the hit piece and be like, this is pretty decent. We ought to send out an email blast on this.
Exactly. Like,
we call the reporter and I'd say, so at what point does this cross the line and become an in-kind contribution to the campaign? Honestly.
Yeah.
And so Republicans need to adapt because the environment has changed from where it was a decade ago. It's not the end of your political career if you get a bad article written about you. It is an opportunity. And if you take that opportunity and understand the media landscape now and utilize it, then you can profit off of their idiocy.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.